As I was saying, he seems to be building chemistry with Eric Decker. Damaris Thomas, I feel he still has they don't seem to be quite on the same page, but I'm sure that'll come in time. But him and Eric Decker really do seem to be, clicking very quickly. Even in the first game, on his the game against the Bears when he only had one drive, he had 3 completions to Eric Decker. So that's definitely something they keep an eye on. Fantasy football guys out there, definitely look at Eric Decker because when you're Peyton Manning's favorite target, you're going to get your stats. So that's something to look forward to if you're a fantasy football guy. But overall, I think things are looking up. There's still plenty to go. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to jump on the MVP wagon just yet. But it's definitely looking up. Peyton Manning definitely seems to be. I think I said this in week 1. He's at about 80 to 90% of what he used to be. But an 80 to 90% Peyton Manning is better than a lot of other quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, actually, we have a little background noise here, but Peyton Manning, he's getting towards the latter part of the career. There's no question about it. And for Manning to put up this sort of a performance, it's only August, though. We don't even have the regular season on tap yet for Denver. And let's just run down that schedule that the Broncos have this year. Now, for Peyton Manning, he's coming back. He's obviously very strong in his return here for the Broncos, but his first 5 games, obviously a big opening stretch for the Broncos. Week 1, they're home against Pittsburgh. Then next week on a Monday night game, they're at Atlanta. The Falcons, a tough team. They were one and done in the NFL playoffs last year, but you can never count out this Falcons squad, including this young receiving core that's just getting better. And then in week 3, they're home against Houston. Then they have the Oakland Raiders, their first divisional opponent. And then they have the New England Patriots. Obviously a tough task for Manning. Now we have another caller on the line. This is Noel Booker of the DSFL, live on the air. Noel, thank you for joining us. What do you think of the Peyton Manning situation? I don't know if you saw his terrific performance last weekend. Noel, thank you for joining us. And what do you think of Manning in Denver?
Well, I think he's getting old. And he might settle down in Denver this year. And I'm thinking that they'll go 9-7 this year. And they'll be on the line for the playoffs at the end of the year.
Yeah, and it's.
Do you see them winning the division, Noel, at 9-7? Do you think they're going to make it to the playoffs with that record?
Yes.
Just winning the division or a wild card?
They'll probably win the division.
Now, it's interesting there for the Broncos at 9-7. That was their mark last year with probably the worst quarterback starting in the NFL with Tim Tebow. He came into that year just hoping to perhaps make some sort of a wildcat or some special teams impact. Then he came on and led the Broncos. Now you plug in perhaps one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Only 9-7, Noel. That's interesting in this weak division that you have with the Raiders. Their quarterback's problems. Palmer leading the league in picks. The Chiefs are just awful. No chance for them winning the division there. Then the Chargers, a lot of injury concerns. It's interesting, me being a Chargers fan, just more problems for San Diego on the injury front. Do you see the Broncos at 9-7? It's interesting how you have them post up 7 losses in the NFL.
I think I could agree with Noel. The main reason, you read the schedule off. I think their schedule's a little bit rougher than last year. I could easily see them going 10-6 to 9-7. But the fact of the matter is, they could very well win the division at 9-7. So with the tougher schedule, I think give or take a game or two. I think that's about correct with Noel saying 9-7 to possibly 10-6. They could always do more depending on how quickly they're able to gel with Peyton Manning. But with that tougher schedule, with some of their out-of-divisional games, I think that's pretty close to on par.
Do you agree with that, Noel?
Yes.
All right, a man of not many words. Well, Noel, we appreciate you calling in, buddy.
Wait, I have a couple of questions, though.
All right, yeah, putting you on the spot, Noel. What's going on?
The first question is, what are your expectations for the Falcons?
for the Falcons. Phil, you might want to take that one. I just bagged on them being, an average team. This guy, and a lot of incoming players that are young and that are getting better. But for Atlanta, Phil, do you see them even winning that division? We all saw them, that division just being, the winner, possibly 9-7, 10-6 by default. Maybe the Falcons. Do you see Atlanta? Yeah, as Noel mentioned, how do you think Atlanta does this year?
Well, it's going to be a very interesting situation with Atlanta, with the NFC South being pretty up in the air. The Falcons did make the playoffs last year, as they did the past 3 years. One and done this past year. With the Saints, with all their suspensions, it'll be interesting to see how they play. Tampa Bay is going to be better than most people expect, and Carolina, if their defense can get any type of situation together, they're going to be harder. I could definitely see Atlanta getting into the playoffs. I think it's safe to say the Saints are not going to be as good as last year. I think that's a pretty safe bet. I could see Atlanta winning the division at, similar to what we were saying with the Broncos, 9-7, 10-6. If you're looking forward for the Falcons, I could definitely see them making the playoffs this year.
Good to know. I think that's a pretty nice prediction. My second question is, now that T.O. has been cut from the Seahawks, do you think he'll be back in football this year or maybe even next year?
Well, that'll be very interesting. I think it's hard to answer that now. I think the only way T.O. is going to get back is, if there's a major injury to a team for a wide receiver. The only team that could sign him, today or, within the next few weeks, the only team weak enough at wide receiver would probably be the Dolphins, simply because, Chad Ochocinco was supposed to be that guy, and, they have a very poor wide receiver core. To make it short and simple, Noel, I think it's Dolphins, or he just has to sit and wait for an injury. So I don't think his chances are very good coming back in the near future.
One thing I might want to put in, maybe a team like the Niners could make that sort of a splash. Michael Crabtree, obviously a bust, was predicted to be one of the best receivers in the coming years, taken in the top 10 in a few drafts ago, 2011. Maybe a team like the Niners could pick him up, but obviously not many teams in need for, a preseason kind of question mark in Owens. I don't think he comes back this year, but maybe a team late in the year might get him, pick him up to a short contract. But both of us really are skeptical on him making any sort of return.
Well, for me, I think he should just retire. Because the coaches, I remember a few years ago, the coaches didn't want him because of his attitude. And I think that's still the same way. But after his pretty crappy performance, all those drops, it just made me think that he didn't have that magical spark he did when he was with the 49ers and Eagles.
You see, I do think his his attitude has changed at least a little bit, because I was reading, Pete Carroll said he was a joy to be around. I could definitely see him retiring, and at that point, it's a 5-year clock to see if Terrell Owens can get in Canton, and that could be a topic for another day. Will T.O. make it in the Hall of Fame? But I could definitely see where you're coming from. It might be time for him to retire. Whether he knows that or not will be up to him. But I could easily see him retiring if things don't work out here in the next couple months.
How old is he? 38, 39?
Yeah, 38.
38, yep.
And this is his 17th year in the NFL.
Yeah, and obviously there's still questions. His off-the-field antics maybe might keep him out of the Hall of Fame. You have some key guys that really could make the Hall of Fame if it weren't for their off-the-field problems. Owens, another one of those guys. For Terrell, we don't see him coming back this year, but it's just one of those things. Maybe a team might need him late in the year, maybe a playoff push. Owens, obviously a talent. Despite his drops, I still think that he's still a solid receiver, maybe a number 3 receiver on some football team, but Owens provides that leadership maybe no team can match. Or maybe a struggling receiving unit can't match. Owens might be able to be picked up, but we're skeptical, maybe doubtful. But in a way, we wouldn't be surprised if he gets taken late in the year Obviously not soon anyway. He just got cut in the first round.
I agree with Nick on this one.
All right, Noel. Well, we have any final thoughts for you, Noel Booker, before we head on to the final portion of our show?
That's all I have right now.
All right. Well, for Noel Booker, thank you for joining us, Noel. And it was obviously a pleasure to have any sort of callers onto the set. Noel Booker said very interesting how he was very up on the. I mean, honestly, for Terrell Owens, I don't see him making a return at all for in the National Football League. I just see him retiring after this year. He's already out for 1 year. A lot of questions. I mean, even the Dolphins, with their coaching staff and how set they are on their ways, I don't see them bringing in a guy this late in the year. Like whenever they have an injury of some sort, I still don't see Owens making a comeback. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, it's definitely a stretch. I'm using the Dolphins as an example. I think it's almost safe to say maybe rivaling the Jets. At least the Jets do have Santonio Holmes. But, a team with just a underachieving receiving core, maybe when the season starts, things turn out better for them. But I think it would take, I'm not saying, it's the Dolphins, but a team that will struggle maybe the way the Dolphins were in the receiving department is the only way T.O.'s going to get a job. There's nobody that at the moment is sitting at their desk saying, get T.O. in my office. The chances of him getting a team, as you said, we're skeptical, if not doubtful, for his return. And, here's a guy that might just want to hang it up and see, roll that dice to see if he ends up in Canton. It's safe to say T.O. won't be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but that's not exactly an insult. Because look at the guys that weren't first ballots. You got a guy like Chris Carter who's still not in the Hall of Fame. And, here's the thing that some people would be very interested to know. Vince Lombardi, did not make it in his first year. So just because you're not first ballot does not make it, legitimized. So, it might not be first ballot, but I think it might be something T.O. can start to think about if he does decide to hang it up.
And for Owens, obviously, maybe it is for his stint in the NFL. It might just be better for him to hang it up now than make some sort of a late season push with a football team and maybe rack up his drop total. I mean, he already has made some tremendous plays. He's ranked second or third all time for receiving yards. He still has been one of the most renowned receivers. And interestingly enough, he wasn't a top 10 pick. He was taken in the third round. Obviously, a lot of guys doubtful, still today doubtful for his chance in Canton, but he's really made an impact in the NFL. Now, we have a quick call on the line. This is Robert Dieters. Now, he is back. He is the leader of national sports. Robert, do you have any questions for us on NFL Goal Line? We are wrapping it up here, but we have one question for Robert before we move forward.
Yes, about the Seahawks and all the release of T.O. and Tavares Johnson and trade. How does this offense look for Seattle?
Well, it's pretty interesting to see. There's a lot of moving parts, as we were saying earlier. You have Sidney Rice coming back from injury. At the basics of it is you have a team that's going to be able to run the football when you have, Marshawn Lynch in the backfield, and Russell Wilson with his scrambling ability. So here's a team, with the rookie quarterback. I think if they, start with maybe a little run first, run to set up the pass, into play action with Russell Wilson, I think you're looking at a team that can realistically go, I'd say, about 7-9 to 8-8 this year.
So you don't think so? This is just going to be an improving season for them.
I think they'd be about where they are. I could maybe see them going 9-7, depending on what happens in the rest of the year. I mean, I don't have their schedule next to me now, but I know that they play the Niners twice. I'm sure they have a few other tough games. I think realistically, they'd be about where they are. This is not quite a rebuilding year, but this is a year where they start to build up to maybe make a run in the next few years.
Yeah, and for Russell Wilson, he's not going to be your guy right now. Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback, and it's interesting how so early into his NFL career, he hasn't even played a regular season down yet. He's named the starter. You just want to believe that the Seahawks are interested in his performance in the coming years versus a guy like Matt Flynn. He did have a great one game with the Packers, signed a big contract with the Seahawks. So I think this is one of those years where let's just get 7 wins on the board and then move forward to next year. We have a terrific defense that will stay a while. They have a lot of young guys, including the leader